if you have to.
Can you find?
Just letting you know we're live.
It's a variety of people. It's a cast.
Okay, like a task force. No.
Not so coordinated.
Oh, because we're going to have a joint meeting with House Human Services, and I want to bring them up
So,
and helping with that. That'd be great.
Okay, we're live, and we have full crew. Okay, everyone, welcome to Lcar meeting of July 27, 2023. Before we get started here, I'd like to go around and do introductions. So, Senator McDonald.
Mark McDonald, Senator from Orange County. Next.
Ginny Lyons, Senator representing Chittenden Southeast.
Representative Mark Higley, and I represent the Orleans Lamoille District.
Senator Dave Weeks representing Rutland County.
Representative Carol Odie, representing the far north end of Burlington.
Representative Seth Baumgartz, Bennington 4.
Representative Trevor Squirrel, representing Jericho and Underhill, and Zoom.
And Senator Chris Bray from Bristol, representing the Addison Senate District.
And
Lindsay Schreier, representing legislative operations.
Charlene is not with us today. She's not feeling quite well enough to be here, so I'm sure Lindsay will wait in her stead. All right, first order of business, the minutes of June 29th, 2023.
I move to approve the minutes.
So we have a motion to approve. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Disapprove? Okay, thank you. All right, first rule up today, Rule 22P39, Department of Vermont Health Access, Healthcare Administrative Rules, definitions. Ashley Berliner for Department of Vermont Health Access is going to be reporting. And squinting a little bit here. And there she is. Okay. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Ashley Berliner. I'm the Director of Medicaid Policy for the state of Vermont, the Agency of Human Services. And today I actually have three rules in front of you. The definitions rule that you referenced, an inpatient hospital services rule, and an outpatient hospital services rule. All three of these rules are part of AHS's effort to move all of the Medicaid rules into the healthcare administrative rule framework and to update all the rules to bring them into the same format and style. We've been in front of you several times over the last several years. And as you may remember, many of our rules have not been touched for 30 plus years at this point. So this today is to bring up to date into the new millennium, the inpatient and outpatient hospital rules, and then updating the definitions rule to correspond with those. So I'll speak, if it's okay with you, to all three of those rules because they were filed together and have the same stakeholder engagement process, and then we can get into the individual rule content. But for all three rules, they were initially filed with Lcar in November of 2022, and we shared these rules with internal stakeholders, including Vermont Legal Aid and the Vermont Medical Society, prior to filing rules with Lcar, and received no comments. On December 12th, 2022, we approval from Lcar and began to go forward with rulemaking. We filed with the Secretary of State in December 2022 and held a public hearing on all three of these rules in February of 23. There were no attendees at that public hearing. The public comment period ended on February 15th, and we did receive a comment from the Vermont Association of Hospitals and Healthcare Systems on definitions in the inpatient rule and outpatient rule, and we made a revision to the definition of inpatient based on the comment received. So with that, I'll go into the specific rule that is up right now. HCAR 1.101 Healthcare Administrative Rules, which is an amendment to an existing rule, and it adds a definition for hospital.
Okay.
That's all I have. So if there are any questions about that rule.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I think it's the third rule, 41. It's in the notes here. Just a point of clarification. I believe that there's a comment here or a notation that there was, sorry. There were substantial arguments, considerations on that particular rule, and the agency has included a letter of explanation in detail. I see the letter and it refers to inpatient, but what was the outpatient issue?
Are you referring to the public comment received?
Yeah.
Okay, so the covered items and services list was removed as that was not exclusive and dated, and we updated all of the prior authorization language to convey that elective outpatient services may require a prior authorization. Not all out-of-state hospitals, though, and Viva maintains a list on its website.
Okay. Any questions? And what we'll do is we'll vote on each rule separately, though.
Got a motion for first one, 39. So I move that we approve 22P39 Healthcare Administrative Rules definitions with proposed modifications submitted by the Department of Vermont Health Access on July 21st, 2023.
Okay, we have a motion to approve 22P39. Any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Rule 22P40.
So this is an amendment to existing rule. It clarifies language about the Vermont Medicaid provider network and prior authorization requirements for elective admission to certain hospitals. And it removes language about services and reimbursement that are described in other administrative rules, the Medicaid state plan, or other Medicaid provider manuals.
Questions? Motion?
And this must be,
I'll move that we approve 22P40. Department of Vermont Health Access and Hospital Services.
With proposed modifications.
With proposed modifications. Thank you.
Submitted by the Department of Vermont Health Access on July 21, 2023. Thank you, Senator Long.
Thank you, Senator.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. And then 22P41, this is the outpatient hospital services. Any more comments, Ashley? All set?
Just the, it's an amendment to an existing rule and it references specific limitations. References to specific limitations beyond the scope of the rule were removed.
Have a motion? Representative Odie. Motion to do what?
Accept the rule.
Okay.
22P41.
22P41, Department of Vermont Health Access, Outpatient Hospital Services.
Thank you. You have a motion to approve Rule 22P41. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Now I have Rule 23E05, which is an emergency rule, Department of Children and Families, Pandemic Era General Assistance Emergency Housing Transition. I believe that Heidi Moreau.
Last to speak, as soon as Heidi says something, she'll.
Good morning.
I see that Michael Bento is he on the I can't see.
Benvenuto. Yeah, Michael Benvenuto.
Michael is not in the.
Not there yet? Okay, well, Heidi, why don't you begin?
Okay, thank you. I'm Heidi Moreau, a policy advisor for the Vermont Department for Children and Families. Today we're presenting the emergency rule, which amended portions of the general assistance rules to incorporate the Act 81 emergency housing transition benefit, and to also incorporate provisions of the governor's executive order addressing the definition of family in the general assistance temporary housing vulnerable populations rule, along with concerns about how the income contribution is calculated. I'd like to start off by saying that DCF is aware that there are concerns from the committees of jurisdiction about the way that the emergency rule amended the GA program rules to implement the Act 81 transition benefit. And it was not DCF's intent for the transition benefit to be an ongoing benefit. DCF was taking advantage of the structure that was in place with the GA program, because the transition benefit would be administered through that same structure. So it made sense at the time to incorporate those provisions from Act 81 into the GA rules. But it is DCF's intent, when this emergency rule expires, to bifurcate the two as requested by the committees of jurisdiction and have a separate rule governing the Act 81 transition benefit. In addition, we are also aware that Vermont Legal Aid had a couple comments on our rule. One of them being that the emergency rule didn't include appropriate as a standard for determining alternative housing placements. And while we didn't include appropriate, AHS does employ a person-centered case management model, and case managers will be working with clients to identify alternative housing that's based on their unique circumstances. We did include a clause that allowed a client to reject an offer if there were a previously unidentified health or safety risk. And that was in response to our collaboration with Legal Aid during the rulemaking process to address their concerns about placement being appropriate. Their other concern was with the definition of misconduct. Misconduct wasn't defined in Act 81, so DCF decided to utilize the same standard, which was violation of motel rules that's in the general assistance temporary housing rules, to apply to this same population to ensure equity in administering the two separate benefits among these populations. But DCF is willing to work with the committees of jurisdiction to develop a definition of misconduct for the second emergency rule. I'm happy to accept any questions.
Senator Weeks.
If I could, Heidi, where in the markup is the language about misconduct? Just so you can kind of focus us in on.
Okay.
We have both your marked up copy and your clean copy.
So we did not include the term misconduct isn't used. Just bear with me a moment while I scroll through, find the appropriate section.
I think if you look at page, oh gosh, I don't have a page number.
Paragraph.
It's
Page, wow.
Big D, 2652.5. And are you, Heidi, you're looking at, and 22, excuse me, 2652, page 9.
D,
Page 9 of the marked up copy, annotated version. And then it's number 3 under D, I think that is what is being asked about.
yep. So,
Determination based on the motel or hotel provider, asking him to leave for violating the rules of the hotel or the motel provider. Is that the section on misconduct?
yes, that's it.
I thought.
So then misconduct or words to that effect, it's only about the relationship between the occupant and the motel and not with local law enforcement?
That's right. That's the way it's in the rule currently. Is that if a client is exited from a motel for violating the rules of that motel.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Heidi, I have a question, and it may be just a date mistake, but I'm looking at the department's estimates that the average nightly rate will decrease incrementally from $148 in July of 2023 to $103 in March of 2023. Is there a date wrong there? Should that be March of 2024? And if so, why is there a decrease?
The Act 81 requested or directed DCF to negotiate rate reductions with motels. So this was based on anticipated rate reductions from those negotiations. And my colleague, Nicole Toussignan, may be joining us momentarily, and she would be able, oh, there she is. She would be able to speak more to that.
Good morning. Sorry that I was late. What Heidi said is absolutely accurate, that we are trying to negotiate rates with hotels to bring that amount down to a more reasonable level.
So again, that date should be, the latter date should be the 2024, March of 2024.
That's correct. That was a typo.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Weeks.
A question on paragraph 2652.4. It's essentially basic needs standards. Can you just review the concept here of what seems like a fairly significant increase, but only in this rule? Can you just kind of give some background on that issue?
You're muted. Please unmute.
What was that, 2664?
2652.4,
Oh,
table of basic needs.
oh, okay. Oh, right.
So 2652.4 has been in effect since 2015, and it's always utilized the Reach Up Basic Needs Standard. The Reach Up Basic Needs Standard has increased a few times since 2015, and the GA program has always followed those increases, but the rules were never updated to reflect that. So we took the opportunity with this emergency rule to update the chart in the rules to reflect the standard that was currently being used by the GA program.
Thank you, Heidi.
Other questions? Senator McDonald.
I have a question about misconduct. My understanding is that if the owner of the facility has a rule and that rule is violated, then that constitutes misconduct as determined by the owner of the facility. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's how it currently works.
So do you have several examples you might give us of such misconduct that would be upheld by the owner of the facility?
I think frequent examples are tampering with smoke detectors, I think smoking in the room, having get more than the number of guests that are supposed to be in the room.
Or be in the room for a meal or for overnight or for a political caucus.
I think if they have extra guests for an extended length of time, that would be cause for the motel to exit them.
Well, what would some examples of lengths of time that would be justified? More than 5 minutes, more than 5 hours, more than 5 days?
It's typically an overnight guest.
Overnight. I have an apartment and I'm a landlord. Not right now. I haven't been since COVID, but I'm a landlord. So I would have that authority to say you can't have a guest for dinner. You can't. When does overnight begin? When does it end?
And this is one of the reasons that DCF looks forward to working with committees of jurisdiction to develop a definition of misconduct that will be more uniform, because currently hotels have different rules, they have different standards, and it's difficult for the department to enforce such a provision. So we are open to reconfiguring that definition to something that's less dependent on the motel's individual sets of rules.
That's usually what the department does when it crafts rules prior to sending them to us. During the last year, how were such rules crafted and who made the decisions on whether or not someone was obliged to leave the facilities?
The motel makes the decision to exit an individual. And in the past, pre-pandemic, the department would implement what was called a period of ineligibility if an individual was exited for violating the rules of the motel. But we're now finding post-pandemic, it's a new world. And that this rule that used to work before clearly needs to be revised and updated.
Lastly, as a landlord in the apartment that I rent, and I had 3 people living in the apartment, and I had someone that came and said they'd really like to rent that apartment, and they were one person. Doesn't take long to figure how many utilities 3 people take and how much wear and tear there is. What would prevent me from having a rule that tossed out the 3 people and replaced it with the single tenant?
The hotels do publish their rules and give them to guests when they first enter the hotel. And so the clients should be aware of what the rules of the establishment are. And it is different from hotel to hotel, as Heidi, outlined earlier. And so I think the clients are aware of what the expectations are. And so that's what we would rely on in terms of when a client is exited. But it is, these are private businesses. And so they have the right to house someone or not house someone. And like Heidi said, we are open to working to revise the definition of misconduct. It will not stop hotels from exiting a household. It will just change the action the department exited.
Mr. Chair, I have no problem sending money to private businesses to pursue the public good. Makes perfect sense to me. I'm asking the question of, having sent the money, what do the private businesses, how are they obliged to treat the people that they serve with their private business with the money, taxpayers' money, to do the good that this attempts to do? What's the limit on their ability to pick and choose or send people packing and replace them with other people that is more advantageous for their private business? What's the safeguard in the rules?
I'm not sure this specifically answers your question, but they're billed, hotels are billed retroactively. So they're billed for the nights that they have a specific client. So they aren't offered a lump sum up, at the beginning of the month, and then they can remove one person and insert someone else in that person's. They're only paid for the nights that they house a specific individual.
Senator Bray would like to speak.
I have two other people.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Heidi. Continuing along this, I mean, my concern here is embedding Act 81 benefit, the hotel benefit, into the general assistance rules. And currently, within the general assistance rules, do you have, just talking about that for a minute, setting aside Act 81, do you establish a contract or an MOU with each of the motels around how folks would be treated within the motel, allowed to stay, and those conditions that the hotel or motel have in place that would maybe send someone out?
No, there are no contracts in place with the motels.
Okay, so the only contract that you have, or the negotiation that I'm hearing you talk about, was the negotiation with cost, how much per night. Now currently, the negotiation that's going on for the per night cost is for Act 81. Is that correct?
That's right.
So it's not, and doesn't involve the general assistance negotiation for cost.
I turned to Nicole to answer that question.
Okay.
I think if we negotiated a cost per night for a motel stay, that the motel doesn't make a difference to the motel, whether they're an Act 81 recipient or a GA temp housing recipient.
But our concern, Nicole, go ahead, Nicole.
No, I was just what Nathan was accurate. Yes, thank you.
Oh, okay. I mean, our concern, as we were talking about the temporary program, transitional program, which we've been talking about since last fall, at least, was the exorbitant cost as a result of having federal dollars available. And now, as we move towards state support, the cost is too much for the state. So we're trying to be cost effective. So now that we have the GA rules and the Act 81 benefit mixed in together, it makes it really difficult. And the misconduct piece is particularly difficult when we understand that the homeless population may be significantly different from the folks who have traditionally been housed in hotels for longer periods of time. So can you comment about that? Either Nicole or Heidi.
What I can say is it wasn't, the intent was not to run the Act 81 transition benefit as if it were the GA temporary housing benefit. And to that extent, it was an oversight to include it within the GA rules. But we were working within the structure in a short amount of time to get these rules implemented.
So what I'm hearing you say is the conclusion that I drew is that this is an expedient decision to put those two together. It's utilitarian because you happen to have GA rules. So let's put the emergency rules in, embed the emergency rules for the benefit into the GA. It becomes extremely confusing. And it doesn't really follow the intent of the legislation. Just, that's my comment. And I think as you look at the comment from the other chairs of other committees of jurisdiction, you also see that. And I understand I personally understand the difficulty, and having to produce emergency rules for a benefit from Act 81 at the end of the session is not easy. I'm somewhat sympathetic. On the other hand, my sympathy ends a little bit because I know we've been talking about this for a while. But I know how hard folks are working boots on the ground, and it makes it tough. So I won't ask any other questions at this point, but thank you for your clarity and information. It's helpful.
Thank you, Senator Lyons.
Okay.
Representative Roddy?
No.
You're all set. Senator Bray?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So my question is I think, around, are we struggling a little bit with the difference between using hotels to house people versus our normal landlord-tenant rules? Senator McDonald was inquiring about, in a way, how arbitrary are they? Because we're in essence creating a housing program, I'm just wondering if you've looked at.
No, we're creating a benefit. I want to be really clear. Don't say program. The GA is a program. I'm just saying this is a hot button for many of the committees of jurisdiction. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, okay. Thanks, Senator Lyons. So it's good to be precise. I think what I'm trying to get to, and the question is, in terms of the misbehavior kind of thing that we were discussing earlier, are there rules that are comparable to how landlords and tenants have a relationship?
No.
In terms of protections, I think that's.
No, there's no parallel motel client protections.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can I do a question? Is there an obstacle to putting those protections in, considering that there's public money, that would be public oversight for public protection?
That was a question.
Is there an obstacle to? Yeah. So anyone don't do that. That doesn't make sense. Don't do it.
Not that I'm aware of.
I do think you could ultimately
could you do it
impact
then?
the number of hotels that would work with the program. Because right now they do have the ability to very quickly exit a household that is not a good fit for their establishment. So any other type, and we do work closely with the Vermont Health Department as they license lodging establishments. So I do think there could be some negative consequences in terms of capacity within the program.
There could be, but I mean, it also could be the case that people with the income stream that they have would be willing to acquiesce and say, okay, we'll do that. Have you taken any polls to see anything, to reach out to see if there's any obstacle besides the hypothetical?
No, we have not done that.
That's it. Representative Haley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Personally, I agree with the ability for these independent business owners to have standards that these folks have to abide by, whether they're homeless or not. During the past couple of years, we've heard horror stories of people cowering in their hotel room in the corners because of drug deals that are going on or whatever else it might be. So if these private motel owners have a policy regarding whatever it might be, I'm sure they're going to do their best to make sure that they're, pretty egregious situations before they ask somebody to leave. So again, I certainly understand the position that these motel owners are in and appreciate the DCF's ability to work on this misconduct issue.
Senator Weeks.
Thanks, sir. It's pretty clear that the definition of misconduct is a pretty critical element of the emergency rule. The difference between tampering with a smoke detector and being drug dealing or larceny or what have you is it's two completely different realms, and we're putting the onus on maintaining conduct on the property owner, on the business owner. Whereas I thought that, and I don't want to misrepresent Senator Lyons, but I think there's a concern that that this definition as it's embedded in the rule right now today lost all its teeth in regards to the original intent of the misconduct clause. I'm curious inside DCF what different options were considered when you graduated to the current definition. What did you consider or reject, and where does the definition of misconduct go from today? If we accept this definition as it's in the draft rule, what's the next step to give more teeth back to the back into the rule to satisfy the intent of the legislation?
So DCF considered, if you're aware, that there was the transitional housing program. It talked about actions that jeopardize the health and safety of other residents of a motel. But ultimately, we decided to just use the same definition that was in the current GA temp housing rule for consistency's sake, knowing that this would be an ongoing conversation to develop a more suitable definition of misconduct.
So several elements of the emergency rule as it's drafted right now are spot on, and they're in keeping with the intent, what I perceive to be the original intent of the rule, with the exception of misconduct. How come there was no linkage in misconduct beyond the motel owner to local law enforcement or state law enforcement, et cetera? Why was that option dropped?
I don't believe that option was ever on the table, but it's something that we're open to considering.
So in DCF's perspective, the onus was entirely on the property owner to maintain conduct, and to maintain who's performing or who's exercising misconduct and who's keeping within the bounds of motel rules.
DCF decided to utilize the same standard in the other rule, which did put the onus on the motel owner.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Michael?
Yes.
Did you want to, I know you're on the list as
Senator.
why don't you come up here, because we're talking about some of the issues that are in your letter.
Yeah.
Before we go for comments from you. Senator Bray, is your hand still up or not?
No, I couldn't see if Mr. Benvenuto was in the room, and so I was just going to inquire about the witness because I see him on our agenda. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, good morning.
You've heard the testimony and the conversation discussion, so I'm looking forward to your comments.
Thank you. I'm Michael Benvenuto. I'm the director of the Elder Law Project at Vermont with Delay. I did submit written comments. I can tell that a lot of the questions were related to some of the issues we raised, and I appreciate that. I missed the very beginning of the department's testimony. So, but I want to talk about our issues because the committee members raised a lot of the same concerns we do, and then we'll talk about the next steps in the process. So I think it's been discussed. We have significant concerns about the lack of a definition of misconduct in the emergency rule. Act 81 did talk about being exited from the motel from misconduct. And misconduct is sort of like a plain language definition meaning. Our interpretation is it does include some concept of wrongful behavior. So it's not just a rule violation. It does involve some higher level or some standard that involves some act of wrongful behavior. It just came up a few minutes ago. There was during the COVID pandemic as part of the transitional housing program, the department did have rules that govern the transitional housing program that operated for that year. And that rule did have a definition of misconduct in it as a basis for terminating someone's benefit under that program. And that did include criminal behavior, theft, violating safety standards like disabling smoke detectors would have been an example of misconduct at that time. Sale or distribution of drugs, so drug dealing would cover destruction of property and threatening others. So a lot of the behavior you're talking about was defined as misconduct during the transitional housing program. So the department did do that. They have an example of what misconduct means. And our position is that the rule violates the legislative intent that uses the standard for misconduct by not defining that. As noticed by committee members, it just says violating, being asked to leave because you violated the rules of the motel. One of the things that came up this morning, we made in our comments, is that the rules vary motel by motel. And they're not, as far as I actually don't know this, so maybe this is a question, but I don't think they're negotiated by AHS. I don't think AHS defines or sets the standards for what are reasonable rules governing this program. So they are entirely at the decision of the motel who's agreeing to participate. And some of the motels participating in the program are really supportive of the residents. They're doing a great job. They're really trying to make this work. And at least from Vermont Legal Aid's perspective, some of the motels that are participating in the program, we have really serious concerns about how they're operating. So the standards for even sort of the consistency across the state, motel by motel, community by community, really varies dramatically in terms of how they are applying what it means to violate the rule of a motel. And so there's a lot of ambiguity about what that means because it's not, and it's determined by the motel and it's not reviewed by AHS. They gave the example of gas, and that's a great example of just ambiguity in the rule, that a resident would potentially not know what it means to violate the rule as relating to have, if they even have rules about gas, like what that means, and does that mean overnight? Does that mean having people over for dinner to visit in the evening? I think that's a really good example. It would not be misconduct unless you're doing something else. So, and then I think the other standard is the determination of misconduct needs to be made by AHS. It needs to be made by the department, which is the motel can exit somebody for violating the rules. That actually would be allowed and lawful even under our position, which is to protect, you have a room at the motel's agreed to have you. If you're violating the rules, they can exit you, but that does not merit termination from this program. You would still be eligible for the program. AHS can't delegate that responsibility to terminate somebody from the program to a motel owner in some particular case. So the AHS, the department, needs to make the decision that this rule violation constituted misconduct. And so I think the rule needs to be clear about that. The second issue we raised, and I'm happy to take questions about this, but I'll go through my issues, so feel free to stop me. There wasn't, I just came in when there was a discussion about it. So I don't know where the department stands exactly on this, but we do have serious concerns. I'm the director of the elder law unit. We work with a lot of people our clients are over the age of 60. Our clients are people with disabilities who are offered various, what we think of as like institutional placements. And that isn't, under the Act 81, alternative housing arrangements can include institutional placements like nursing homes, like residential care homes, like residential substance use or mental health treatment facilities. And there are lots of other laws and really strong public policies that relate to the rights of people electing to go to a nursing home. There's even like a nursing home Bill of Rights in Vermont. Residents, people should still retain the right to elect that setting as appropriate to them and for their needs. And so I think that's something that needs to be, Act 81 says those are alternative placements, but I think it incorporates sort of the core standards of law, this sort of core public policy of Vermont, that somebody going to a nursing home, they have to need nursing home care. They have to they have to choose that setting is appropriate to their needs. Vermont has something called Choices for Care, where it lets people choose, for example, the setting in which they receive care, in a home, in a residential care, in a nursing home. And they're not losing that right at some level of self-determination to make those decisions. We passed the Older Vermonters Act. I should have written down the year. That may have been passed last year, so that might have been 22. It's possible it's 21. But that included principles for governing services that relate to this, and that includes like a right to self-determination. So I think the right to... You're correcting me, I'm sorry. I didn't write that.
That's fine, I'm trying to figure it out too.
But anyway, that includes a right to self-determination. So I think that's an example here. It sounds like the department is willing to revise or clarify that in the program. It is possible that this is the sort of thing that the department, maybe even working with Dale, which would be principally really involved in sort of in licensing these settings. They could do this by policy. So they could put out a policy like, what does it mean to be offered an alternative placement in one of these institutional settings? So it's possible that it doesn't actually require a change in the emergency rule, but we just need to make sure that happens now. We can't wait months to figure that out, because people are going to be potentially offered these settings now and be forced and be making those choices. We raised it in our comments. It's also really complicated where they give people 48 hours to decide. And just the practical implementation of that. Somebody's being offered a nursing home and they're a person with significant disabilities are getting all this care in their motel room. And there are actually motel residents that meet the standard. They potentially need to go to the nursing home, see the facility, figure out where that is within the community, where that works with their family, and then how they're offered that placement. All that sort of pre-evaluation needs to occur before any 48-hour time period starts. That'd be our view, is the only really practical, realistic way to make that practicable. I wanted to weigh in on the committees of jurisdiction. I know you saw their memo related to incorporating this Act 81 transitional housing program into general assistance. We agree with those concerns. That raises a lot of additional issues that I didn't raise in my memo, because again, I hadn't seen their memo by the time we submitted our comments. But from our perspective are the participants in the program. And so there are a lot of concerns by making this benefit or this program part of general assistance that really relates to beneficiary or participant rights, like the notice they receive, like how the program runs, appeals. We're actually struggling to figure out what process governs an appeal of a termination from this program. If it's in the GA rule, it'd be reasonable to think that the GA rules govern participant notice and appeal rights. But if it was a standalone rule, the department would have to would spell that out in a way that would be clear. The other thing about the implementation of this rule by adding it to GA is GA operates on like a pre-authorization period. The department witnesses can explain this far better than I do, but you get offered for a certain number of days. Under this program, you get authorized for like 28 days under this program in the rule. And then it's unclear what happens at the end of the 28 days. You would get reauthorized if you continue to be eligible. But under Act 81, Act 81 says you are eligible to continue to participate in the program through March unless you're offered an alternative placement. So Act 81 really contemplates a continuous period of eligibility from now until March, until something occurs. So slicing it up into 28 authorization periods is part of bringing it into the G program. And we have concerns about that. What would happen if there was a dispute on day 27 or day 28, and then they don't reauthorize the person, and whether they would continue to be eligible for this program on an ongoing basis. So I missed the beginning where the department talked about what they're willing to do. The committees of jurisdiction talked about fixing these issues with the next emergency rule, which I wasn't sure what timing they were contemplating, but that may be November, December, right? Would be when because this rule would expire at the end of December. And our position is that these changes, this implementation, these issues need to be resolved now. Right. So this is the sort of because these people are in the program. This started July 1. These issues are starting to come up. And so the department needs to, if they're going to split this program off, that we can't wait till December to do that. That needs to occur now in August, for example. And to sort of clarify the issues you've raised, like a definition of misconduct. We can't wait because things are going to occur between now and that. That's all I had I'll take questions though. Thank you.
Representative Hickman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we know, even over the past 3 years, how many of the individuals have been removed from a motel for misconduct of any type? Is there a number?
Well, I don't know that number. Because the program has changed a lot over the 3 years, and I don't know if the department keeps that. We've had difficulty getting like hard numbers. Sometimes I like how many people are in the motels on any given day, but they have census data, but I don't know if they track that information. It definitely has occurred. There's been a lot. My impression is there's been more. It's not the same group of people that have been there for 3 years. People have cycled in and out of the program. So there has been a lot of turnover to the program. So there definitely have been people exited for violating the rules or for misconduct during the program.
I just think it would be important if there's potential for a problem. What has the past 3 years looked like for, granted, there's folks like you say that go in and out of the program, but I'm talking about definite misconduct and whether or not even those individuals were housed at another motel unit. So, I mean, we're talking about a potential real issue here, and I would think we would have 3 years of information to know whether or not it's a problem.
I think that's true, and I think that's a good question to ask the department again. But the other thing is, this group of individuals were participants in the program before, in June, and potentially even for many months before that. They're families with children, they're people with disabilities, they're people over the age of 60. And so this is potentially not the demographic group that's going to present those issues in the same way as may have occurred prior to July 1st, where there was a lot of people who were exited, something like 800 as of June 1, that had been extended, that didn't meet the categorical eligibility that they used for.
If I can, just the number I'm seeing here is 1,250. Is that a different number than?
I was thinking that was the people that are in this program as of July 1.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Does the department have any response to the testimony that we've just heard?
I can quickly confirm a couple of the last points. 1,250 households are the number of households that were in housing and are part of the cohort as of June 30th. And we do not track clients that have been exited from a hotel due to misconduct or breaking the rules. So I don't have a way to produce that information for you.
I'm hearing concern about the issue of misconduct and appropriate placement. Issues that don't feel like they can wait for the next iteration of the emergency rule. Not sure how to solve that. One of the potential solutions is to work on some policy that's not rulemaking, but policy that defines or addresses these issues. I'm curious what the department feels about that process, and committee members, whether you have comments or feelings about that.
DCF can certainly consider clarifying these points in policy. We can also look at adopting an emergency rule before the current emergency rule expires.
And can I clarify I actually think misconduct needs to be clarified in the rule, because the rule, as the emergency rule, doesn't have that term at all. So that really wouldn't be appropriate to do by policy. It's just the rule is violating the rules of the motel. We were saying that the concept of an alternative housing placement could be fleshed out in terms of being offered something like substance use treatment or a nursing home, because whether that's offered to you and when it's appropriate to offer to you could be set out maybe more clearly in a policy note.
But I also hear the department saying that they could do both, right? Did I hear you correctly, Heidi? That you could do some other rulemaking prior to the second iteration to address the issue of misconduct?
Correct. And we do want to work with the committees of jurisdiction to figure out a definition of misconduct.
Can I go to Senator Lyons?
Good, thank you for that. I'm going to step back again. Last fall, we had a joint meeting between House Human Services and Senate Health and Welfare talking about all of these issues, asking how can we place people who are currently having a benefit, a hotel benefit, motel benefit, how can we place them in a transitional process that would take us through to, I think, what was our first date? I think it was March 15th, 2023. That discussion included a conversation about those with disabilities and those requiring special care, chronic needs, elderly, and so on. Then in the Budget Adjustment Act, we added language similarly. And we've all been concerned about this right along. These emergency rules are not new conversation. I'm not blaming any individual or organization, but what I'm saying is the problem is a long-standing one. And then to come back at this point and say, and as the letter indicates, or the memo from Anthea Dexter Cooper indicates that committees of jurisdiction will be helped and work with the Agency of Human Services on guidance documents for those folks needing notice or information about misconduct, that there will be a guidance document produced. My question is, why hasn't that guidance document been discussed prior to this time? Because it's so critical to what we're talking about, whether it's people who have a chronic illness related with substance use disorder, or whether it's folks needing a residential care facility or disabilities. I get extremely frustrated when I begin thinking about this because of the length of time that we've been trying to solve the problem. We've worked as much as we can on the legislative side, and that's the Act 81 it was a culmination of work between the legislature and the administration. Administration did great work between May and June with leadership in the House and Senate. And so I'm a bit confounded that we don't have something before us that is an emergency rule for the Act 81 benefit to extend the hotel program until April 2024. So that is my comment, and that probably is the basis for a lot of the comments that are in the letter from the chairs of the committees of jurisdiction. So that's just it's a comment, and Heidi and Nicole, I know that you've worked hard on these rules and you've tried to embed it into a program that we currently have to make it more utilitarian. That's, that might work, but, I think the committees have expressed that in our letter, that the rules could go forward, but without the blessing of Lcar. They are emergency rules, are already in place. But to say that we need more time for guidance is a little bit frustrating. So that's all I'll say, Mr. Chair, at this point.
Thank you, Senator Lyons. Senator McDonald.
Senator Lyons, thank you. Because that's the problem we face. And the agency said, what we're wrestling with here today is Lcar will be solved with ongoing conversations. Lcar is the place that rules come to when the ongoing conversations have wrapped up and made their conclusions and have put into text what the rules are and what the appeals are. And that hasn't happened. And this isn't brand new. So I have faith in what will come forth in the future as a result of ongoing conversations will nail some of these things down. But I'm not prepared to vote in favor of the emergency rule, which has yet to nail down rules and doesn't have an appeal process and allows me, a landlord, to play this out to my personal advantage. There's someone who dismantled a smoke detector because the damn thing was beeping all night. So I'm going to vote no, and we will certainly be subject to ongoing conversations, which have yet to be resolved. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Odie.
A little as an aside, this is the second time that I've heard over the course of months where numbers haven't been kept track of. So the 1,250 households as of June 30th, who they all qualify by legislative intent for a benefit. If there are names associated with those households, are there? I wonder, Ms. Tuzunian?
Yes. We have a list of the 1,250 households by name and by the members that are in the household, if they include adults and children, so that we can track on an individual basis who has moved into permanent housing. We have households that have already exited to an apartment, so that we can track where every household ends up.
Okay, so maybe I misheard because I thought that you didn't know if they had been. So you're keeping track of them so that you can make sure they have the benefit that they qualify for as of June 30th.
That's correct.
All right, I misheard then. I'm happy about that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Senator Bray.
I'm wondering if council can help us a little bit on our legal status. So it's an emergency rule. It's already in effect for 180 days. And I'm wondering when that 180 days will end.
So an emergency rule can remain in effect for up to 180 days. I believe the counting out of the 180 days from DCF was December 28th of this year of 2023. So let's just say roughly end of December. But I think there would be a way forward if there were to be an emergency rule that took effect prior to that to have another emergency rule that would repeal the pieces of the emergency rule that have been embedded in the general assistance rules, because there is that sort of there are some change. So there are some amendments that were done through this emergency rulemaking that they're planning on making permanent, that are separate and apart from this temporary housing benefit. So my understanding is end of December, let's say it's December 28th, and that there could be forward where there was an emergency rule that took effect sooner than that and sort of replaced this or part of this rule.
Okay, and thank you. And I know that we have the option of neither approving or disapproving. And I'm wondering if you can tell us, is that made by motion, or is it basically passing over, a motion to pass over? I'm trying to remember the last time this possible scenario played out.
Yeah, so I'm going to point to two different things that have happened within the last, let's say, 2 years, both of which actually related to DCF rules. So you'll remember for one of the earlier iterations of a temporary housing benefit, you passed over the rule several times and then eventually objected to it on the grounds of legislative intent. So Lcar could just not do anything with the rule, neither approve nor disapprove through no motion whatsoever. You just don't take action, and it wouldn't change anything about the rule. It is in effect. It is an emergency rule. It can continue to remain in effect. An alternative option, and this is what you did with the DCF related to childcare based on a Supreme Court decision that was done through emergency rulemaking, and you thought that the emergency rulemaking standard wasn't met, but you didn't want to object in 3 rules that were all coupled together. You did via motion moved to affirmatively neither approve the rule nor object to the rule. And then you directed the Ledge Council to send a memo related to and explaining the basis for Lcar's decision there. And I think that would be consistent with what the chairs of the subject matter committees are suggesting you do now. Affirmatively say, we are neither objecting nor approving, and directing Ledge Council to prepare for Lcar to send correspondence related to what the expectation is going forward in terms of the fact that this emergency rule will not get you to April 1 of 2024. So something additional needs to happen, whether it not happen until the end of December, whether it deal with misconduct and the placement piece, whether it just decouple the temporary benefit from the general assistance rules. I think those are all things that could be elaborated upon in a memo if a memo was sent in conjunction with Lcar neither approving nor disapproving of the rule, or neither approving nor objecting to the rule, because Lcar doesn't disapprove, it either objects or doesn't object.
Sure. Thank you very much for that. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just one quick question back to the department. And I'm wondering if, based on the ongoing conversations plus today's visit with Lcar, if the department has plans to work on an emergency rule that would be brought forward before the end of the year when this rule expires.
That is something the department will consider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
I would, if I may, make a request to the department that as you're making that consideration, that you send something, a memo or a letter to Lcar, letting us know what your plan is regarding it. I don't want that to be open-ended.
Yes, the department can do that.
Thank you.
So, yes, I think given the explanation by Anthea Dexter Cooper, our Ledge Council, that it might be helpful for us to send a letter off explaining, I think if you look at page 2 of the memo that has come from the chairs, and we did evaluate this very much with Ledge Council before we wrote the letter. And I think if we send a letter off to the agency explaining our lack of approval or objection, but indicating that we felt as a group that unanimously felt that this was inconsistent with the intent of Act 81. That by sending the letter, we might encourage the consideration that has been indicated and the writing of a special one, a single emergency rule related to Act 81 that would carry through until April 2024. So that would be my recommendation. Does it need to be in the form of a motion?
Well, I heard Ledge Counsel indicating that that might be our best approach, to have a formal motion of neither approving or disapproving, and that we would then craft a letter or a memorandum to the department detailing all the concerns and issues.
Okay, well, I will make that motion. I will make the motion that we neither approve nor disapprove the rules as written. And then I'll make a subsequent motion. And that would be for, what rule number is it? 23E05. Contrary to the intent of the General Assembly, but that would be in the letter. So I think just our recommendation is that Lcar neither object nor approve the rule, and then the next would be a second motion.
We have a motion from the line. Representative Bongard.
Just a question I was going to ask, and I'll relate it back to the motion before we're done here. What happens when a landlord, when a motel owner says to somebody, "You're out"? Are there things taken out of the room that day or the next day? And then, equally important, what happens to that person? What do you do? Because under the general assistance rules, it sounds like they are deemed to have engaged in misconduct, and yet under Act 81, they are entitled to housing. So what happens when that happens? What do you do?
So the timeline for someone exiting a hotel is between the hotel and the client. It could be immediate, it could be the next day. It depends on the individual situation. For individuals that are part of this housing program, if they're exited, they can immediately apply for the general assistance program without having a period of ineligibility applied. So theoretically, they could exit the H81 program and move immediately into the general assistance program.
Okay, so the reason I was wondering about this is it does relate to the issues raised by legal aid and who determines misconduct and what happens. It seems like it has potential to be arbitrary. A crying baby is used as an excuse to have something else happen. I don't know, but I'm just wondering about the vagueness in the rule is concerning to me, which relates back to the motion and what happens in the urgency of the issue raised by legal aid makes me wonder when we do the letter, if we would want to request an emergency rule within 60 days or 45 days or something else that deals with these issues rather than just raise our, so I'm mixing the two motions a little bit here, I realize, by the way.
And the issue that you're raising really mixes two things. It mixes Act 81 with general assistance. And I do know that the general assistance housing program is something that our committees will be very interested in looking at. That hasn't been updated in a while. And Nicole and Heidi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that it hasn't been updated in a while. And I think there's a strong interest, at least on the legislative side, to look at the GA program and do what we can to improve it. But Act 81 was pretty clear. And so that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And it's something that might be resolved within the time frame that you're talking about. So, yeah, it's a great point. Thank you.
We have a motion from Senator Lyons. Any more discussion?
Does Anthea Dexter Cooper, is that motion appropriate? My motion okay?
Yeah, so it sounds like going to be a split potentially in how you approach this with the motion. So the first motion that I wrote down was that Senator Lyons moves that Lcar neither approves nor objects to the rule. And then I think your second motion is going to be directing Katie, Jen Carvey, and me to work on correspondence from Lcar back to DCF, and then we'll need to know what should go in that correspondence, whether it addresses misconduct or just the decoupling and the expectations on timing. So I'll stay tuned for those details, but I think your first motion is spot on.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Weeks.
Just again, for clarity, if we have neither approve nor disapprove, what becomes of the language that's currently in the draft emergency rule in regards to misconduct?
It is in effect. It is the rule. It has been in effect since it was adopted, and it will remain in effect until December 28th. I'm going to continue using December 28th because DCF hasn't corrected me until December 28th, unless there is something that changes in terms of DCF adopting a new rule. Lcar, whether it objects or not, cannot change the text of a rule that is in effect in the case of an emergency rule.
Okay, thank you.
More questions? Okay, all those in favor of the motion from Senator Lyons, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Is that?
No.
Okay. Senator Lyons?
I'd like to move that we ask Ledge Council to draft a letter indicating that Rule 23E05 is contrary to the intent of the General Assembly. And as I think expressed in the letter from the chairs, and that further the letter asks for the administration, for the Department Agency of Human Services to, with all alacrity, develop emergency rules specific to Act 81. Anthea, does that fit legally?
Yep, that works. And then I don't know if you're going to continue and talk about the other pieces related to the legal aid letter or not, but that would just be something we would need more guidance on.
That would be fine. Yes, we'll add the concerns expressed.
Any discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Sorry, Senator.
Can I just, thank you. The additional concern, Senator Lyons, is are we talking about also definitions of misconduct, an appeal process, for instance?
I believe we are.
Okay, thank you.
Those things that are embedded in Act 81.
Yep.
It's a benefit. We're looking at the benefit. We're not looking at an overhaul of the general assistance program. That's something that the legislature will have to pick up with the administration in January, or maybe even before, but not as part of this process.
Okay. Well, we'll see a letter back before it's sent, right? So we can all have a discussion at a future Lcar meeting.
100% yes. We would never feel comfortable writing something like this without getting Lcar to actually approve sending it. And since Katie McClin is here, I'm going to look to see if she thinks we need any additional guidance before we go off and start working on this on Lcar's behalf.
I do have a question, and that relates to Representative Bongart's comment around the timing of this. I mean, obviously, I'm looking at Katie, and I know that the timing becomes important for her and you, Anthea, and also for the administration. When do we get these rules back? When do we see them? Should we establish a timeline that has our review before November 1st? And there I'm looking at Nicole and Heidi, as well as our Ledge Council.
Well, since no one's speaking, I will say that from a timing perspective, you are not scheduled to meet again as a committee for 4 weeks, for 28 days. So if you are not going to have a separate Lcar meeting, then you're in a position where this isn't going to be ready to be sent for 4 weeks. So that is cutting into the amount of time that DCF would have letter in hand with respect to what your concerns are. And then from there on, I would say it is, what is possible on both sides in terms of them finishing what they need to do for rulemaking.
Okay, there's no way we can have that letter going out for that, huh?
Well, I have a question back to Ledge Council. Yeah, we're not scheduled to, I think, the 24th of August at this time. Given our rules, joint rules, if we hold a special Lcar meeting that's remote in nature, so we don't have to all come here to review a letter, let's say in 2 weeks.
Oh, you definitely could meet in 2 weeks if you wanted to, and you could do it fully remote. It would count as the 3 that each of you are allotted to be remote.
We haven't used up our 2 meetings, we get 5 members.
What's that?
If we have 5 Lcar members that haven't used up their 2 remote meetings, that would be
you're allowed
a
3.
simple solution.
You're allowed 3.
3?
Yes.
Yeah, it's 3. And my recollection is that Senator Bray has used 1 and Representative Higley has used the other, has used 1. So everyone would be able to be remote for the meeting if they so chose.
So it's we can figure out the logistics, but it is, we could potentially in 2 weeks, assuming that you can get this drafted, which I'm hearing you say is going to work okay.
I think we can do it. Katie?
Okay.
Okay, Katie's nodding.
I see head nods from Katie too, so we'll work out the specifics of that. Senator McDonald.
Mr. Chair, I have been critical of the witnesses here from children and families, and I wouldn't trade places with them at all. You've got a tough job, and thank you for hearing us and for the work you do. This is about difficulties in governing, and you folks are terrific. Thank you very much.
Ditto. No, you got it.
We didn't vote on your motion.
We have not voted.
So we still have a motion from Senator Lyons on memorandum. I think we've touched all the points we needed to at this point. So any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Ashley and Nicole. Heidi and Nicole.
Ashley left.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so next on our agenda, I believe we have 2 rules, 22P26 and 22P27, that basically our action is a request for extension of adoption deadline. I believe we're hearing these on August 24th. Is that correct? Anthea?
Yes, that is correct. Sorry, Charlene is normally the one who is the keeper of your schedule. Yes, these are scheduled for August 24th.
Okay, great. So Lauren, do you want to?
Is that P26 and 27? Both?
Yeah, 26 and 27.
Yes, both of them.
Yeah. Lauren, floor is yours. Oh, can't hear you.
No. Do you happen to have a headphone jack plugged in anywhere on your workstation? Things that are plugged in.
Now?
Yes.
All right, now I can't hear you, so I'll be. Okay, how are we now?
Good.
I apologize for that. I'm so sorry. I've been listening this whole time and I had no idea. So I'm before you today. Thank you so much for having me. Again, we had 2 rules that were put through the rulemaking process, 90% of it last, or 75% of it last fall. One was for notaries continuing education, which was necessary because we had notaries renew. The other was for alternative paths to licensure for funeral directors and embalmers. And that was necessary for workforce shortages. And we proposed it to Lcar, went through that process, was published. We held public hearings and public meetings. We finished all that work at the beginning of December last year. Then the administration changed, and then there was a legislative session. We had 2 attorneys leave. I was the only attorney for about 4 months. And then we had one attorney come on, and the other attorney came on in May of this year. So we were a little backlogged. Per the Administrative Procedures Act, a rule can only pend for 8 months before Lcar can, I want to make sure I get the correct language, before it has to be an agency has 8 months from the date of initial filing to adopt the rule unless extended by Lcar. So I'm here before you today to ask for that extension. We have filed the final paperwork, as Representative Squirrel said. So the rules will be heard if this extension is granted at the end of August and become final if there's no objections. So we've done the work at this point, but we do need that extra month to ensure that we're not in violation of the Administrative Procedures Act.
Senator Bray.
Mr. Chair, if there is, well, I'll put a motion on the table to expedite things a bit, and I don't know if there's further conversation. I move that we grant an extension on the Office of Professional Regulations 8-month adoption deadline for 22P26 administrative rules on alternative preparatory paths for funeral directors and embalmers until September 1, 2023.
We have a motion from Senator Bray. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. Thank you, Senator Bray.
Thank you.
And we have 22P27, right? That also?
Yes, you should do both separately.
Yeah. So, Senator Bray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would similarly move that we grant an extension on the Office of Professional Regulations 8-month adoption period for Rule 22P27, Administrative Rules for Notary Public Continuing Education, until September 1, 2023.
We have a motion from Senator Bray. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you all.
Okay, next up, we have 2 letters to committees of jurisdiction on 22P28 and 22P29, and then separately a letter to committees of jurisdiction on Rule 23P10. So let's, Anthea, you want to take us through that?
Sure thing. So to refresh your memory, it would have been, I think, 6 or 8 weeks ago was when you first started working on the CBs, and it was just the RBs at that point, the Residential Building Energy Standards memo to the committees of jurisdiction. You reviewed it very quickly at the end of your last meeting, which was a month ago. And at that point, there was a request to make some changes to it, to expand upon the subject of the memo, to have it also cover the commercial building energy standards, to sort of expand what the concerns were to not just training and on the rules, but rather just the administration of the RBs, including training and enforcement. So using that broader just administration term, and then having as examples of what is included in the administration be training and enforcement. all of the changes that were made in response to the requests from Lcar when you were looking at the language last time are highlighted in yellow. That's been distributed and it's posted to the committee page. And I can make more changes. I've been working with Ellen on this, but I think this should capture where the committee was at the end of your last meeting.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the committee?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Bray?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Anthea and Mr. Kowski for working on the letter, tuning it a couple times through, and I appreciate that it captures, I think, accurately all the details that we were talking about, and also expands who it's distributed to, so that the housing committees that don't necessarily deal jurisdictionally with the energy codes, but certainly have an interest in them because of impacts on housing affordability, short-term, long-term, that we include them as well. So I don't know if we usually make motions to approve a letter, but I would move, yes, I'm seeing a nod from the pitcher and catcher here. I would move approval of the letter that Ms. Dexter Cooper has just reviewed, and the current version is dated July 27, 2023. And if I could offer one quick note, just by way of reassurance, the Energy Standard Working Group has already been established, had a preliminary organizing meeting, and has already had its first full regular committee meeting. So the work that we were talking about having operate in the background is actually underway.
Okay, we have a motion from Senator Bray. We have a question from Senator Lyons.
A comment, I guess. One of the concerns that we have expressed either in the committee or outside, the costs of this kind of administration for both commercial and residential. Should we include something like administration including cost? Or is that going to be something that's understood? I mean, if we're going to expand a governance structure or extend the work to the local level, I mean, there'll certainly be costs associated with it. So do we want to say anything related to the costs of these kinds of programs in the letter, or leave it to the committees to understand that's part of the whole discussion?
So I would say from a, can we change the letter perspective, we certainly can change the letter. I would also say that I think through the legislative process, when the committees of jurisdiction are taking testimony on the administration of and what's involved there, that cost, it would be odd if cost didn't come up. And then I would probably look to Senator Bray and Representative Bongartz on two of the committees that would be involved there to see if they think that that is a necessary clarification or addition to the memorandum.
Do you think we need to add? Because I'm fine not adding it, but I do think it's an issue that could be overwhelming or underwhelming.
So I appreciate Senator Lyons flagging the issue. I think it's been inherent in our conversations from the outset, really. Like, it's not only how we're going to administer, but how we're going to finance whatever system of administration there is. And you're right, there's a real sensitivity about what who will do, what kind of administration might be created, where it will be housed, and what the expense would be, and then how it would be funded. So you're spot on the topic. And I think we've, in all the conversations I've been in, the concern around finance has been part of that conversation. If you'd like to be more explicit, I'm game.
I don't know. I think you'll carry the water with that. Not that we want a lot more water, but.
Representative Hickman.
And maybe it's addressed somewhat in the letter that says that jurisdiction might eventually lie with a different committee. It gives examples. It doesn't give examples of appropriations or ways and means, but I could, it might be enough.
Yeah, good point.
So I think that addresses the money side of things a little bit, sort of tangentially. That also was included to address the fact that if this is something that is maybe brought within the jurisdiction of, I'm going to get the names wrong, but like the Fire and Safety Code, which is a code that does exist, that the jurisdiction over that would maybe be not with House Environment and Energy and Senate Natural Resources and Energy. So the different subject matter jurisdiction piece there as well is why that language was included.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Okay, all those in favor of Senator Bray's motion to send this letter? Let's say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you. And the next one, which is the rule governing outage reporting requirements for originating carriers and electric power companies.
Yep. So you heard this rule at your last meeting. It was 4 weeks ago. You heard testimony both from the E911 board and also from Stephen Whitaker speaking as a concerned citizen. Some of the concerns that he raised had to do with whether or not voice telecommunication services that rely on new technologies would be covered by the outage reporting rule, and then different reporting thresholds there. And that is captured in this memorandum. This is not a memo that you've seen yet. It was distributed prior to this meeting, and there's no highlighting indicating changes or anything because this is the first draft of the memo. This one would go to Senate Committee on Finance and also the House Committee on Environment and Energy, which are the committees that currently have jurisdiction over the E911 board and outage reporting.
Any questions or comments? Senator Bray.
I would move approval of the letter to the Senate Committee on Finance and House Committee on Environment and Energy, just reviewed by Ms. Dexter Cooper, dated July 27, 2023.
There's no discussion. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. I believe that's our agenda for the day. Before we adjourn, I'm looking at the calendar and I'm looking at August 10th as a remote meeting to discuss the transitional housing memorandum. Is that a day that seems to be okay for folks? Again, this will be remote. Rather than send out a doodle poll, is 9 o'clock in the morning seem like a reasonable time? Rather than wait until like 10 o'clock or something like that.
Definitely more reasonable. If we're
Schedule a 9 o'clock meeting. It should be brief anyway. Okay. All right, then that's what we'll do. Okay, great. All right, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.